Contact is gone. Entire grid silent. The comm officer's words cracked across the command chamber, not as panic, but as fact. And every man in the room froze with his hands half raised above boards that no longer had meaning. Captain Jarek Voss stood with his knuckles pressed into the table, eyes locked on the display where a mining township on Pallas had existed an hour ago. It had not burned, it had not exploded, it had simply been replaced by glassy terrain and pockets of lifeless vacuum. The sensors traced shallow ridges where streets once ran, and the command feed still carried fragments of civilian chatter, frozen in the moment of interruption. A father calling his son in from the docking yard, an old man asking for power credits, a mechanic reporting that ore carts had been cleared, all cut mid-word, as though someone had pulled language itself from their throats. Commander Thane Rook broke the silence first, his voice coarse. Same signature as Nymar Station. Clean erasure. They're here. The room stank of sweat and burnt coffee, the air scrubbers working overtime against the press of bodies. Voss forced his hands to unclench. Confirm all orbital assets? Nothing survived. They stripped sensors first, same pattern. Rook's jaw locked tight. Dr. Marius Cade, the systems engineer, adjusted his glasses and muttered, "They don't just kill people. They erase data. They leave nothing to study, nothing to understand. They've done it since Orion Gate fell. And now they're walking toward us." Voss turned toward the window slit that looked out over Ceres' ragged surface. The mining pits glowed red with heat exchangers, the lights of men working below, unaware that an empire was sweeping closer. He felt his chest constrict, not from fear but from the weight of responsibility. His brother had been stationed at Nymar when it vanished, his last transmission nothing more than a clipped laugh during a card game. Jarek had replayed that fragment 100 times, chasing the tone of a man who had no idea the world beneath him was about to dissolve. The comm flickered again, this time a mechanical relay. A courier packet had arrived, transmitted from a drone left at the edge of the belt. The words unfurled with bureaucratic coldness. Surrender all orbital stations to the Draconian Authority. Refusal will lead to erasure. Compliance will be judged by full evacuation within 2 rotations. Rook swore under his breath. They don't even hide it anymore. Voss lifted the packet with a steady hand, studying the stamped coordinates of previous targets. Each one matched a colony whose name now carried only silence. He placed it back on the table. Gentlemen, this is not about surviving their arrival. It is about teaching them that silence can be cut. If we attempt a fight on their terms, we vanish. If we force them into ours, maybe we leave a scar. Quent Miles, the admiral patched in from Earth, filled the chamber with his gravel-edged baritone. The old man had served long enough to see empires rise and fall, and his face bore the lines of those memories. You're authorized for full doctrine, Jarek. No limitation on methods, no restriction on sacrifice. The Council won't admit it publicly, but they have written us off already. You give them a reason to believe the belt can hold. Voss exhaled slowly. His hand brushed the table's edge, the cool alloy grounding him. Then we begin silent doctrine. Every buoy live, every decoy seated, every channel hardened. We bleed for data, not spectacle. Cade stiffened, his voice strained. We ask men to walk out knowing they won't come back. Voss met his gaze. We ask them to give meaning to deaths that would otherwise vanish without record. If we lose, they still learn nothing. If we trade men for measurement, we can build a weapon that uses silence as its edge. The chamber rustled with uneasy agreement. Outside, the low rumble of loaders moving ore filled the bay. Voss could smell the hot iron drifting through the vents, a reminder that this rock had been a mine long before it became a fortress. He straightened. Thane, prepare your frigates for corridor patrols. They'll be first contact, and they'll die for it. Make sure they know why. Rook nodded once, his eyes hooded. He understood better than most what it meant to deliver orders that were death sentences disguised as assignments. Cade leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly as he set the first buoy diagnostics to cycle. Once the grid wakes, we'll feel every displacement in stone and ore. They can cloak emissions, but they cannot cloak mass. Gravity doesn't lie. The room tightened around his words. For the first time, there was a thread of hope, not bright but steady, like a lamp in a sealed corridor. Later that night, Voss walked the docking bays where crews were mustering. He passed rows of men buckling into flight harnesses, the sharp tang of lubricants mixing with recycled air. Some checked rifles, though they would never leave their ships. Others whispered prayers, though not all of them believed. He stopped at one frigate, where the squadron leader saluted with a hand that trembled only after it lowered. Voss spoke without ceremony. "Your ship is not bait. It is the yardstick. We measure the time from their first shot to your last signal. With that number, we can fire where they never expect. Every second you survive will turn into a map." The leader swallowed hard but nodded. His men looked at him, then at Voss, and in that moment they understood they were not being lied to. Death waited, but death would be used. The docking clamps released, and the frigate slid out into darkness, joining others that flared briefly as thrusters lit before falling to silence. Voss watched them go, the glass cool under his hand, and thought of his brother's laugh echoing across a channel now long dead. Back in the command center, the first buoys came online. Symbols filled the heads-up displays, each one marking an invisible thread strung across the asteroid belt. The screen smelled faintly of burnt circuits from overworked relays, a tang that clung to the back of the throat. "Mesh is alive," Cade reported. "We'll know the instant they cross the stones." Rook stood with his arms folded, eyes locked on the symbols. "They'll come quiet, they'll come fast, and they'll think we're blind." Voss lowered himself into the command chair, the fabric stiff against his back, the weight of the room pressing down. "Then let them think it. When they cross the net, silence will not hide them anymore." The men shifted around him, uneasy yet drawn to the gravity in his tone. Outside, the ore pits burned with red glow, the air dry with dust, the taste of iron heavy on the tongue. Somewhere in the belt, a fleet of predators was advancing. They had erased entire cities without warning, but for the first time, the next colony would not vanish quietly. "They crossed the outer stones," Rook said, his voice low but steady. The grid picked up displacement shifts near buoy 12. "They're inside." The command deck bristled with tension. Men leaned forward over their boards, every finger movement deliberate, every eye drawn to the laser plasma displays, where faint green arcs rippled across the map of the asteroid belt. The buoys had been disguised as mining debris for years, drifting among broken rock, hidden in plain sight. Now they came alive, each one registering the subtle tug of invisible masses moving past them. It was the first real confirmation that the Draconians were near, creatures who had wiped entire populations without leaving a trace. Jarek Voss felt the air taste stale as it recycled through the vents. The chamber was quiet except for the muted taps of operators updating readouts. He leaned closer to the central console, his face lit by shifting contours of gravitational distortion. "How many?" Cade adjusted his glasses with a trembling hand. Sweat clung to his forehead, and the light caught in his lenses. "Too early for a complete count, but the shifts are significant. That's not a probe detachment. This is a strike group." "Which direction?" Voss asked. "They're angling toward the palace corridor, same vector they used when they burned Nymar," Cade replied, his voice tight. "They think we're blind. They're walking the same route again." Voss's hand curled against the armrest of his chair. He could feel the rough stitching under his palm, the fabric worn thin from long hours of command. "They want to repeat their erasure without effort. Fine. Let them believe nothing has changed." Rook shifted on his feet, his uniform creasing as he moved. "You want the frigates ready?" "Not yet," Voss said. "If they reveal themselves too early, the enemy adapts before we learn enough. Hold position until the first wave comes closer. Every minute they think we are blind is another minute we learn their habits." The words hung heavy. Everyone knew those habits would be paid for in men's lives. Hours passed under strained silence, broken only by updates whispered across the deck. The asteroid belt rolled outside, jagged silhouettes lit in copper glow from the sun. Mining rigs sparkled faintly on the horizon, their operators unaware of the predators gliding nearer. In the bay, Rook walked through the frigate line, boots striking against grated floors. The air carried the tang of coolant and oil, sharp enough to sting the nose. Crews stood by their ships, armored suits unlatched, hands tightening and loosening around helmets. He stopped in front of Lieutenant Harvin's crew. Harvin's eyes flicked upward, full of questions he did not ask aloud. Rook lowered his voice so only the young officer heard. When you go out, don't think about shooting first. Think about buying us a clock. Every second you last feeds into the grid. That's how you matter here. Harvin swallowed, nodding once. He pulled on his helmet, the lock clicking in place with finality. The sound echoed faintly in the bay. Back in command, Cade's voice cut sharp. Second shift detected. They've split formation. At least 4 heavier masses with smaller escorts in front. Voss stared at the overlay. The buoys traced their trails like ink across glass. He could almost see the shape of their attack in his mind. Silent hunters slipping through corridors, ready to carve the belt apart. His brother's laughter flashed again in memory, torn mid-breath, and he steadied himself. He tapped the comm. Rook, launch first patrol. In the bay, clamps disengaged. The frigates slid outward, their hulls catching light from docking lamps before they disappeared into shadow. Each vessel vanished into the asteroid field like stones tossed into a dark pond, their paths calculated to intersect with the unseen enemy. Voss stood and addressed the deck. His voice carried the weight of decision, not anger, not bravado, only clarity. Every ship we send is a mirror. They reflect the enemy's path onto our grid. They may die, but they will make silence visible. That is how we fight them. The men bent over their console, sweat dripping down foreheads, lips pressed tight. Each operator knew lives would vanish from their boards within the hour. On the edge of the belt, the first encounter sparked. Buoy 17 flashed anomalous readings, displacement climbing suddenly, then fracturing into multiple vectors. Moments later, the comm crackled with a frantic burst. "Frigate Callan here. Contact." The words shredded into static. The ship's marker flared on the display, then dimmed to gray. Operators cursed under their breath. Voss's jaw set hard. "Cade, overlay their last telemetry." Cade's fingers trembled as he dragged the fragments into the system. The last seconds of Callan's path traced across the grid, linking with the buoys. A curve appeared, showing where the enemy had been. "There," Cade whispered. "We see them now." More frigates launched dust canisters, spraying polarized particles into the dark. The dust caught against the unseen hulls, clinging in invisible streams. Within minutes, weak glimmers of starlight revealed faint shadows sliding among the rocks. For the first time, they saw Draconian ships not as invulnerable phantoms, but as outlines drawn by stubborn dust. The Draconians responded with swift violence. Bright lances of fire carved across the belt, shattering frigates in seconds. Explosions lit the darkness, the vibrations rattling Ceres' underground chambers faintly like distant thunder. Men clenched fists as markers vanished from the display, each one a crew gone without burial. But as they died, their last burst carried through. Hardened channels embedded in the asteroid rock transmitted their signals unbroken. The deck screens updated, showing paths now sharper, more defined. The fleet's shape emerged, a spear driving toward Pallas, confident in its doctrine. Rook's voice carried across the bay comms as he watched another ship fall. "They're bleeding us, but they're showing their hand. Keep the line long enough and we'll see the whole pattern." Voss's chest tightened. He imagined Harvin's face, the young officer's jaw stiffening as he sealed his helmet. Somewhere in the belt, Harvin was fighting in silence, knowing he would not return. The command chamber smelled of hot circuitry and recycled air, the taste of dust on every tongue. Men kept their eyes fixed on the shifting arcs, their hands slick with sweat as they recorded every fleeting movement. Finally, Cade raised his head, his voice shaking. "We have it. The path, the shape, the weight of them. The mesh is alive." Voss's shoulders sagged in relief, but only for a moment. He knew what it had cost. He spoke quietly, almost to himself, though the room heard. "They think they walk unchallenged, but every death has cut their outline into the stone. Now we can strike." "Launch the dust," Voss ordered, eyes fixed on the heads-up display where green arcs tightened across the corridor. "Make their glide readable." Rook answered from the baynet. "Harvin on vector, canisters armed." Laser plasma displays mapped debris lanes and the dark paths between them. Cade stood at the central console, watching each buoy shift. First paint on particle contact, he said, hands near manual keys. Scatter spikes if they pass close. Voss pressed his palm to the table and felt a tremor from pumps buried in rock. Remind Harvin he is buying time, not trophies. I told him, Rook replied. He understands. In the bay, Harvin's crew buckled in with crisp motions, breath tasting of tin and old coffee. Helmets sealed, visors dropped, cooling packs sighed across heated skin. Harvin spoke through the net, voice steady. We spread the drift, we watch it stick, we carry the timing home. Eyes on scatter. Their frigate eased from the cradle and slipped along a black canyon, hull lights dimmed to pricks. Dust pods rotated into place with quiet mechanical grinds. Cade tracked their icon along the path he had nursed for months, a ribbon through rubble and cavern. Entering the throat, he murmured. 3, 2, 1. Deploy. On the main display, a cloud unfurled like sand thrown from a fist. Particles drifted across an invisible surface, and starlight fractured. A shadow appeared, long, knife-narrow, sliding through the field. Another followed, squat, tucked to the first ship's flank. Draconian hulls had been rumor and aftermath. Now dust drew their outlines. The escorts answered with heat. A line of energy scythed the cloud and turned grains into a glittering curtain. Harvin snapped hard right, counter thrusters biting. Straps yanked across chests. A toolbox skittered and struck a bulkhead. Hold the lane, Voss said. Keep them brushing grit. Harvin's reply came with breath sawn thin. Copy. Pattern 2, full spread. Pods spat another cone that intersected where Cade expected the lead ship to slide. The outline wore a ragged halo now, a mottled smear at odd angles. The gunner could have fired, but the order held. The frigate kept painting. The escort punished the affront. An unseen spear punched through the aft quarter, and a tremor rolled bow to stern. On Ceres, the hit arrived as a telemetry spike that made Cade flinch. Aft breach, life support holding. He kept working. Scatter is clean. Rook braced a hand on Voss's shoulder to anchor himself. He won't last long under that. Tell him he breaks when the rim looks like a festival, Voss said. Rook relayed. Harvin gave a short bark. We'll bring the lanterns, he said, rolling under a shelf that scraped belly plating with a scream like glass under a knife. Dust poured again. The lead ship veered to miss a slab, clipped the next, and powdered stones streaked across its coated flank. The escort overcorrected and drifted into a lane Cade had gambled on. Now, he breathed, slamming his palm on a manual key. Lines on the grid snapped into a lattice that made operators sit straighter. Stride locked. All boys agree. Harvin, clear to run, Rook called. Go. Harvin tried. The frigate pivoted at the canyon mouth. Engines pushed hard. Another invisible lance drilled the forward compartments. The comm filled with a sudden intake of breath and then silence. On the display, the icon dimmed. Cade's voice cracked, then steadied. Last burst riding fiber. We are catching every scrap. Voss stood. Time from first paint to final loss. Cade read the figure. Send Vero, Voss told Rook. Different route, same mission. Tell them what Harvin bought. Rook nodded. He made the grid worth something. Varro's team launched on a fresh vector, weaving through spinning shards. They dusted where the enemy had been, rather than where they were likely to be now, testing whether the predators would mirror their last approach or alter cadence. Minutes crept by. Then a glancing blow grazed the tail, fragments pinging the hull like sleet. The crew cursed in relief, then tightened focus. On the deck, sweat-stung eyes and fingers slipped on keys before men wiped palms on sleeves already damp. A technician entered data that would become the skeleton of doctrine, hands shaking while he tried to keep numbers straight. Miles appeared on the main screen from Earth, features drawn, voice quiet enough to pull every ear. Status, Voss did not varnish. We marked them. We measured cadence. Harvin is gone. Vero is engaged. The corridor is mapped enough to open the next gate when you unlock it. Miles closed his eyes. Authority granted. Carry it locally. The link cut. Cade pressed hands flat on the console to still the shake. I put their names into the code headers, he said. Not for any archive. I needed them there. Voss nodded. Rights matter when arithmetic turns into epitaphs. Rook, Voss said, load the last burst package into every patrol leaving within the hour. No more fallen crews vanishing into rumor. Every loss returns a message. They understand the cost, Rook answered. They already paid it, Voss said. Now they see the purchase. A quiver ran through the stone as a mine cutter deep below bit into a new seam. Voss pointed at the corridor, where glittering trails still marked a river of predators moving under night. We move to the next gate. They wanted emptiness. We give them a mirror and a ledger. After Vero returns, or is mourned, we stop showing and start removing. Cade lifted his head. When the second time matches the first, we know the stride is real. Voss watched the stamp on Harvin's last pulse and the live clock beside Vero's feed. When they line up, open the quiet weapon. The deck settled into focus. Out past the stones, a hunter pack slid on, wearing borrowed dust like masks that would not shed. Tonight the belt kept a memory, shadows casting themselves and men learning to read them. Fire the first slug, Voss ordered, his voice carrying across the command deck like a hammer falling on stone. The chamber held its breath. Men leaned over heads-up displays as data streams rolled across them in harsh green fonts. Every operator knew what was about to happen had never been tested in combat. Whisper cannons had been buried under series for years, hidden behind mining cover stories, their rails anchored into the rock with counter-mass plates designed to swallow the recoil. Until now, they had existed only as theory, as a final gamble that silence could be turned into a weapon more deadly than noise. Cade wiped his palms on his uniform. His face glistened under the glow of console lights. Target locked on the lead cruiser. Their stride has been confirmed by 3 buoys. Vector is clean. Rook clenched the railing beside him, his knuckles pale. Crew morale depends on this working. If it fails, we burn every ship we've got and still gain nothing. Voss did not glance up. His eyes stayed fixed on the arc representing the first alien cruiser sliding through the belt. If it works, every death we've paid until now writes itself into their fear. Fire. A button depressed. Deep under the rock, magnetic rails screamed silently. Operators on deck felt the tremor vibrate through the soles of their boots. Then nothing. No flash, no trail, no warning. The projectile streaked into darkness at hypersonic speed, unseen until it struck. On the display, the alien cruiser bucked. Its outline, still faint from dust, tore open along its midsection. Fragments spun away, tumbling with unnatural grace. For the first time in memory, a Draconian warship fell not to accident or retreat, but to a human shot. The deck erupted. Men shouted, slammed fists on tables, clapped each other's backs. For seconds, the chamber felt like a floodgate had burst. Voss stood, his voice cutting through the celebration. Quiet. You cheer when all of them fall, not one. The silence returned quickly, heavier than before. Cade leaned forward, eyes wide. Impact velocity clean. Countermass held. Launch signature remained invisible. They never saw it coming. Rook exhaled, shoulders dropping. Then we've finally given them a reason to doubt their doctrine. Another buoy pinged. Enemy escorts shifted formation, spreading further apart. Cade frowned at the change. They're confused. They think one of their ships malfunctioned. Voss's lips twitched into something near a smile. Good. Confusion breeds hesitation. Prepare the second shot. Moments later, another slug tore through space, unseen until it cored a frigate escort. Hull plating vented into nothing. Its faint silhouette spun broken across the dust field. This time, the Draconians responded. Energy flares snapped from their vessels, directed in wild arcs, trying to find the invisible weapon. They fired into empty corridors, striking nothing but stone and fragments. They don't know where we are, Cade said, awe creeping into his tone. Their doctrine depends on tracking signatures. They're blind. Rook's jaw set. Blind predators lash hardest. They'll turn brutal now. He was right. A third human patrol was caught, a frigate gutted before it could retreat. The comm cut off mid-yell, leaving a silence sharper than the explosion. Voss lowered his head, a flicker of pain crossing his features. Every loss still teaches us something. Feed their telemetry into the next volley. Adjust trajectory for drift. Cade nodded. Already doing it. His fingers danced across keys. Numbers streamed. Target locked. Ready. On your mark. Fire, Voss said. Another tremor rolled through Ceres, deep and guttural. A heavy cruiser at the heart of the enemy's spear fractured, its hull ripped open like a split shell. The alien formation faltered for the first time, ships breaking stride to avoid collision. In the bay, cheers spread again, but this time muted, restrained, as though men feared celebrating too loudly might break the spell. Rook stared at the screen, his face unreadable. 3 hits. They'll stop thinking malfunction soon. They'll know they're being hunted. They already know, Voss replied. Look at their spacing. On the display, the enemy ships widened gaps between them, stretching their spear into a thin, uncertain line. What had been ruthless efficiency was unraveling into defensive caution. Cade swallowed hard. We've broken their stride. Their doctrine is cracking. The chamber smelled of sweat and heated circuitry. The operators sat rigid, breaths uneven, hands damp on their controls. Men knew they were watching history twist before their eyes. Voss rose slowly from his chair. Mark every shot. Catalog every failure. When this battle is retold, it will not be said we fired blindly. It will be said we wrote the book on how silence itself can kill. Rook turned to him. And what of the crews still out there? Varro is holding Corridor 6 with half his engines gone. They don't care about writing books. They want to live. Voss locked eyes with him. His voice dropped, heavy and personal. If Varro lives, it's because the enemy believes we've already killed enough of them to matter. That belief is his shield. His suffering is not wasted. Rook clenched his jaw, but he did not argue further. He knew the truth cut both ways. The operators updated feeds, their boards glowing brighter as more dust trails revealed fractured ships. Alien movements grew jittery. Command bursts intercepted on passive receivers carried clipped tones, far from the arrogance of their opening demands. They're angry, Cade said softly, almost to himself. They thought they defined silence. Now we've stolen it. Voss walked to the wide observation slit at the back of the chamber. The asteroid belt stretched beyond, jagged shapes cutting against Starfield. Somewhere out there, men had died to create this moment. Somewhere more would die before it was over. He could taste the dryness of recycled air, feel the ache in his shoulders from hours locked tense. He pressed both palms against the glass. Mark today, he said, his voice calm but resonant enough to reach the far wall. Mark it in the roles of every fleet officer, every miner, every child back on Earth. Today we cut predators from their own shadow. Today they learn silence belongs to us. The deck listened, not as soldiers but as men hearing history bend. In that moment, they felt the weight of what had been bought in the fear of what was yet to come. Their shifting formation. Rook's voice carried across the chamber with an edge of alarm that silenced the chatter of operators. On the heads-up displays, the green lattice of buoys lit up with new trails. The Draconian spear, once tight and ruthless, had unraveled into a loose crescent. Ships that had always moved as if tethered by one mind were now fanning out, stretching the line, probing for threats they could not see. The whisper cannons had pierced not only hulls but certainty. Their doctrine of silent dominance was breaking, and the predators were showing their first hesitation. Voss leaned closer to the main screen, the glow sharpening the lines of his face. They're not retreating, he said. They're searching for the blade that cut them. Cade muttered without lifting his eyes, fingers running fast across his board. Their coordination is collapsing. Intercepted command traffic shows hesitation. They're doubting their own instruments. He sounded half in awe, half terrified at what such doubt would provoke. They'll try to break free before they bleed further, Rook warned. Predators that lose their stride lash out or run. Either way, the corridor won't hold much longer. The tension thickened in the room. The recycled air tasted dry and hot, the tang of overworked filters stinging the back of throats. Sweat trickled down the necks of men bent over their consoles, each one imagining what would happen if the Draconians realized the truth too soon. Voss straightened, his voice level, decisive. Open the corridor. Make them believe we're abandoning the field. A retreat will draw them where we need them. Heads turned toward him, startled. To order a corridor open, to stage a retreat when victory had just begun to taste possible, felt like madness. Yet none of them spoke against him. Rook's brow furrowed as he approached the command table. You want them herded into black net, don't you? His words were not accusation, but grim understanding. Voss gave a single nod. Holden spent decades guiding those stones into place. This is the moment, but they won't walk willingly into the trap unless they think we're breaking. Cade raised his head, his glasses slipping slightly down his nose. You're asking for more sacrifices. Crews holding the false retreat will be shredded. I'm not asking, Voss said quietly. I'm telling you it's the only way to end this. Whisper slugs bleed them, but black net crushes them. Rook inhaled slowly through his teeth, the sound harsh in the tense room. Then I'll brief the captains myself. He left the deck, boots striking iron grating with finality. The chamber fell into a taut stillness, broken only by beeps from buoy markers updating their arcs. Down in the docking bay, Rook walked past men suiting up. The air smelled of oil and scorched insulation. Frigates sat lined like beasts waiting for rains. Crews moved quickly, but without chatter, every man knew what was being asked. Rook stopped at one cluster, catching the gaze of a captain named Loran. The younger man's jaw twitched, but he held his salute steady. We're supposed to play broken prey, aren't we? He asked, his voice dry. Yes, Rook answered honestly. You'll light the corridor, make them believe they've forced us back. You hold as long as you can, and when the grid closes, the belt will finish the work. Loran's lips thinned, but he nodded. Then we'll burn bright enough they keep following. Rook clasped his shoulder, squeezing hard. Your names will be carved into the stone of this colony. That's not empty comfort. That's the truth. Minutes later, frigates launched, their thruster flares brief as sparks before vanishing into shadow. They scattered down the corridor, leaving paths open wide enough for Draconian vessels to pour through. Back in command, the bait was taken. The crescent shifted again, curling inward to follow the retreating line. Buoys lit up with mass signatures, slipping exactly where Voss had hoped. They're moving into the corridor, Cade reported, his voice trembling as he spoke. Vorik himself is leading from the flagship. Rook returned to the deck, his expression carved into stone. Crews know the odds. They're holding. On the displays, the green icons of human frigates blinked as they traded fire with unseen predators. Explosions flickered like brief stars across the corridor. Each burst sent vibrations through the floor as sensors picked up the shock waves. Cade clenched the console. They're dying too fast. Voss kept his eyes locked on the display. They only need to last long enough. The room's atmosphere thickened with smoke from overheated panels. The taste of burnt plastic clung to the back of tongues, making throats raw. Every man on the deck swallowed it with grim acceptance. Another frigate winked out, then another. The casualty toll mounted with a cruel rhythm. Operators bit lips until they bled, recording losses as ordered. Finally, Halden's voice cut through on a secure line from deep within the asteroid command vault. Black net is aligned. Orbits converging. Trigger awaits your mark, Captain. Voss closed his eyes for a single second, then opened them again. Hold until Vorik is committed. When his flagship passes buoy 42, spring it. On the main display, the enemy formation pressed forward, pulled deeper by the apparent route. Vorik's flagship, a massive silhouette still blurred by dust, entered the lane with arrogant certainty. It believed the humans broken. It believed doctrine would carry it. Cade whispered, almost reverent, He's inside. Voss stood, shoulders straight, his voice cut like a blade. Halden, close the gate. Deep in the rock, gravitic triggers flared to life. For decades, Halden had nudged asteroids, shifted their paths, masked the work as mining. Debris. Now the stones obeyed their long design. They turned, subtly but inexorably, pulled by gravity into converging vectors. The deck fell silent. Every man knew what was about to happen could not be stopped. Through the slit of the observation window, the stars blurred as colossal shadows crossed them. Jagged bodies of rock, kilometers wide, slid into alignment like chess pieces sealing a checkmate. Cade's hands shook visibly. Once they realize, it'll be too late. They can't outburn that mass. Rook exhaled sharply. We've caged them. Voss kept his eyes on the display where Vorik's flagship surged deeper into the corridor. His face bore neither triumph nor relief, only the weight of inevitability. Then let the belt pass judgment. The room braced for the silence before the storm, each man tasting fear, sweat, and the bitter air of machines pushed beyond tolerance. They had carried the enemy this far. Now the stones themselves would finish the task. "Trigger engaged," Halden's voice carried from the deep control vault, rough and unwavering. "The belt is moving." Every man on the command deck turned to the heads-up displays as if the screens were windows into fate itself. Arcs bloomed across the lattice of buoys, showing massive bodies of rock beginning their converging paths. For years, those asteroids had drifted like forgotten rubble, their altered orbits disguised as natural drift. Now they slid together in a slow inevitability, locking the Draconian Fleet inside a corridor that was narrowing by the minute. Rook gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. "If they realize it fast enough, they'll burn everything they have to scatter." "They'll try," Voss replied calmly, though his throat felt tight, the taste of metal lingering as he swallowed dry air. "But stone does not lie. Gravity has no mercy." Cade leaned closer to his console, the green light reflecting off his sweat-slick skin. "Voruk's flagship has registered the shift. I'm intercepting bursts, orders to break formation. Escorts are already firing thrusters." The chamber quivered as another whisper cannon slug fired from beneath Ceres. The tremor was felt through boots and bones, followed by the dull thud of impact recorded seconds later. On screen, a Draconian escort spun out of control, venting debris. The shot hadn't been fired to destroy. It had been calculated to shove the vessel just enough to push it deeper into the converging zone. "They're running into the teeth," Rook said, almost in disbelief. "They don't see the teeth," Voss answered. "Not until it's too late." Through the narrow observation slit, black shadows moved against the starfield. At first glance, they seemed like ordinary fragments drifting, but slowly, unmistakably, they grew into giants. Kilometers of jagged rock drifting on colliding paths. Men on the deck felt their breath catch at the sight, an ancient, primal fear triggered by mountains moving where mountains should not. "Flagship is accelerating," Cade reported, his voice climbing in pitch. "Voruk's trying to punch through before the net closes." Voss turned his gaze on the display. "Rook, order the frigates to hold the corridor longer. If they falter, Voruk slips the trap." Rook looked at him hard. "They've already bled. You're asking them to hold against a charging monster." "I'm asking them to hold so none of this was wasted," Voss replied, his tone like cold iron. "Tell them." Rook relayed the order. Down in the corridor, what remained of the frigates answered without hesitation. Their icons held the line, even as one by one they winked out, consumed by invisible spears of fire. On the deck, the air grew thick with the sharp odor of overworked electronics. Men coughed, rubbed their eyes raw, but no one abandoned their station. They were witnessing the culmination of decades of sacrifice and planning. A buoy flashed red. "Voruk is almost clear," Cade warned. His fingers shook as he entered trajectory adjustments. "One more push and he breaks through." Voss raised a hand. "Halden, drop the final stones." From the vault, Halden's reply came without hesitation. "Dropping." On the screen, two massive bodies pivoted into alignment, their momentum guided long ago by nudges so subtle no draconian sensor had noticed. Now drawn by gravity, they slid toward each other like the jaws of an ancient predator. The flagship's icon barreled forward, trying to squeeze through the narrowing gap. "Too tight," Cade whispered, his face pale. "He can't make it." The deck seemed to hold its breath. The flagship fired everything it had, thrusters flaring, drives burning white. The corridor lit like a furnace as the massive vessel clawed for freedom. For a moment it looked as though it might slip through. Then the converging rocks kissed its hull. The impact wasn't a flare of fire, but a shudder that rippled across the grid. Men felt it in their feet, in their teeth, in the silence that followed. The flagship buckled. Hull plating tore, fragments spiraling away like shrapnel from a cracked blade. The vessel twisted violently, slamming against the second stone. The air in the command deck filled with the faint vibration of recording equipment rattling as the alien ship crumpled under forces no drive could resist. "They're finished," Rook said hoarsely, his throat raw. The other Draconian ships tried to scatter, but the net was already closing. Some slammed into drifting debris, their silhouettes shattering. Others were torn by secondary impacts as the converging rocks pulled more fragments into their wake. The belt itself had become the executioner. The chamber was silent except for the labored breathing of men who had just watched the impossible unfold. On the displays, the once feared Draconian spear was nothing more than scattered wreckage. Tumbling in silence, Cade's eyes glistened as he spoke, his voice trembling. "It's over. The predators are gone." Rook leaned heavily against the table, sweat dripping down his temple. "Don't tell them outside it's over. Not yet. Let the crews see what the belt did first. Let them understand why their brothers died." Voss stood slowly. He placed both hands on the command table, knuckles pressed white against the alloy. His voice carried across the room, steady and heavy with finality. "Do not cheer. Do not celebrate. Record everything. Every second. Every death. History will not remember this as luck. It will remember it as judgment written in stone." He turned toward the observation slit one last time. Outside, the stars burned cold, and the drifting remains of the Draconian Fleet floated like broken bones across a battlefield no one had thought could ever be won. He inhaled, the air hot, dry, filled with the taste of sweat and burned wiring. His chest rose and fell with slow deliberation. Voss whispered, not for the room but for himself, "Brother, it's done." And for the first time since the erasures began, silence belonged to humanity. "Transmit the casualty roll," Voss said, his tone as heavy as the stones that had just closed the trap. The operators hesitated. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak names that no longer belonged to the living. Yet one man finally keyed the line, his voice breaking as he read off ship designations and crew counts, the numbers echoing through the command deck like hammers striking coffins. Each syllable carried weight, lives lost to buy the victory that still tasted bitter in every throat. The chamber smelled of sweat baked into uniforms and the dry sting of overheated wiring. Men shifted uneasily, some covering their faces with their palms, others gripping the rails as if letting go would send them drifting into the void. Rook broke the silence with a voice raw from strain. "We killed a fleet, but what do we tell the families? That their sons became markers on a display?" Voss did not look at him at first. He stood by the observation slit, staring at the drifting wreckage of the Draconian armada. Flames did not flicker in the dark. There were no pyres, no banners, just jagged fragments twisting slowly, silent testaments to death delivered by gravity. At length he turned, his eyes shadowed. "We tell them their sons gave the galaxy its first reason to fear us." Cade's hands shook as he gathered data streams into ordered logs. "The Draconians won't come again soon. They rely on doctrine as religion. We shattered it. That alone is deterrence." "Deterrence doesn't bury the dead," Rook muttered. His fists stayed clenched at his sides. Voss crossed the room and placed a hand firmly on his shoulder. "Number. But remembering them does. Every name stays in the record, not as statistics, but as the foundation of silent doctrine. Their deaths will shield those who come." After the words steadied the crew more than any cheer could. No one wanted triumph, they wanted meaning. Hours later, the command deck emptied of noise, leaving only the murmur of machinery cooling and the scraping of boots as men filed out. Voss remained, joined by Cade. The engineer looked worn, his glasses smudged, his fingers red from typing without pause. He whispered, "When I coded the last burst packets, I added their names. Every one of them is inside the lines. I couldn't bear to let them vanish as data alone." Voss studied him. "You turned equations into epitaphs." Cade swallowed hard, throat dry. "It was the only way I could keep working." Voss nodded, the motion slow, deliberate. "Then those names will live in every report, every tactic, every weapon we field from now on. They'll never be lost." Later, Admiral Miles's face filled the main display, his features drawn by exhaustion. The elder officer's voice was low, almost reverent. "The Council has received word. They don't know how to react. Fear mixed with disbelief. Entire empires that bowed to Draconian dominance are already whispering that the predators have been broken by miners and soldiers of Earth." Rook lifted his head, bitterness still heavy in his tone. "Whispers don't build fleets. How long before someone tests us again?" Miles answered with a tired shake of his head. That is why the record matters. The galaxy must believe what happened here wasn't chance. You turned silence into a weapon. That story spreads faster than any ship. The connection cut, leaving the command deck dim once more. Later that night, Voss walked through the lower tunnels of Ceres, where the surviving crews sat among their machines. The air carried the sharp scent of grease and the lingering tang of burned insulation. Men sat on crates, some staring at their boots, others scribbling notes to families that might never capture the truth of what they'd endured. Voss stopped at one group gathered around a cracked console. A mechanic named Drevin looked up, his face lined with exhaustion. Captain, were we really the first to ever kill them? Or did we just get lucky? Voss lowered himself onto a crate beside them. He spoke slowly, every word chosen with care. Luck didn't nudge stones for 30 years. Luck didn't put men in frigates knowing they wouldn't return. Luck didn't turn dust into a mirror. That was work, sacrifice, and belief. Luck is fleeting. This was earned. The men listened in silence, some nodding faintly, others wiping their faces with rough sleeves. For a moment, the weight on their shoulders eased. When Voss returned to his quarters, he sat alone at his desk. The recycled air tasted stale, and his body ached with fatigue that went deeper than muscle. He opened a small case and withdrew a data tag. His brother's last transmission, frozen laughter cut mid-breath. He set it on the table, staring at it until his vision blurred. He whispered to the empty room, "You were erased without sound. Tonight I gave them silence back." His hand trembled, not from fear but from release. The weight had not lifted, but it had found balance. Back in the control vault, Holden studied the final trajectories of the collapsed stones. His thick fingers tapped slowly across the console. He knew future generations would study these vectors, not as mining anomalies, but as proof that patience could bend empires. He muttered to himself, "Stone remembers longer than blood." On Earth, the first transmissions already spread through civilian channels. Grainy recordings of alien silhouettes breaking apart beneath drifting asteroids reached homes where mothers and fathers waited. Some wept, some cheered, most simply stared in disbelief. For once, the erasure was not theirs. Back in the belt, Ceres itself remained restless. Families gathered in dim corridors lit by emergency lanterns, waiting for word of sons and brothers. The casualty list began rolling, names read aloud by officers who had no better words than truth. There was no ceremony, only raw honesty. Tears fell into calloused hands. Voss walked among them, offering no speeches, no grand declarations. He clasped hands, embraced men who clung to him, bowed his head in silence when words would have failed. Each touch grounded him further, reminding him that the doctrine born in this battle was written in flesh and bone. When he finally returned to the command deck, he found Rook standing alone by the observation slit. The tactical officer's eyes were red, his voice steady only by force. "Do you ever wonder how many more names it will take before the galaxy accepts us as more than prey?" Voss joined him at the glass. The debris of the Draconian Fleet still drifted outside, illuminated by cold starlight. "It doesn't matter how many names. What matters is that each one is remembered, and each one buys time for the next. That is how a species survives." Rook let out a long, shaky breath. "Then let's make sure this ledger never gets forgotten." The two men stood side by side, watching fragments of alien pride turn slowly in the dark. Neither spoke again, but both understood. The battle had ended, yet the weight of it had only just begun to settle into human bones. "Send the message," Voss ordered, his voice low but carrying across the command chamber with finality. Operators shifted uneasily at their boards. The air was heavy with the sharp tang of burned circuitry and the dryness of recycled filters that scraped the back of throats. Every man present understood the gravity of what would be transmitted. It was not a boast. It was not a plea. It was a declaration. Humanity had faced erasure and had turned the weapon of silence into a judgment against its predators. Cade's hands trembled as he set the comm relay to high-power mode. His glasses slipped down his nose. His eyes reddened from strain. Content reads, "Earth claims sovereignty over the belt. Any intrusion will be answered with doctrine. Confirmation, Captain." "Not doctrine," Voss corrected, stepping forward. His face was lined, his voice stripped of all ceremony. Call it what it is. A warning carried on the blood of our dead. The operator swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. He keyed the transmission. Across channels, encrypted and raw, the message burned outward toward Draconian relays and allied networks. For the first time in generations, the balance of terror had shifted. Rook stood rigid beside the table, his fists clenched. "Do you think they'll believe it?" "They'll have no choice," Voss replied. He gestured toward the observation slit. Outside, fragments of Voruk's flagship drifted, torn by stone into meaningless wreckage. They lost a fleet not to numbers, not to superior fire, but to inevitability. That kind of loss infects memory. Cade spoke softly, almost as if confessing. I intercepted fragments from their last transmissions before collapse. They thought their own sensors were lying. They accused one another of sabotage. He looked at Voss, eyes wide. We didn't just kill them, we broke their trust in themselves. Voss nodded once. That is the real victory, fear of their own silence. Every empire built on dominance falls the moment it doubts its foundations. The deck remained quiet for a long stretch. Only the muted clicking of keys and the low hiss of air systems marked time. Then Admiral Miles appeared on the main comm display, his face hollowed by fatigue, but brightened by something harder to define. Resolve. The Council has received your record. Your transmissions are already reaching colonial channels. Entire worlds once bowing under draconian dictates are lifting their heads. They see you forced silence into a blade. They will hesitate before they test us again, Voss answered. That hesitation is our shield. Miles leaned closer to the screen. His voice dropped, almost reverent. Captain, you understand what this means? You've rewritten the galactic map. You've turned miners and soldiers into the architects of a doctrine that will echo for centuries. Voss did not smile. His face remained solemn. Then may the echo remind them of the names that carried us here. When the comlink ended, Voss left the chamber without explanation. Rook followed him through the dim corridors of Ceres, where emergency lanterns still burned, their orange glow casting long shadows across stone walls. They passed workers slumped in corners, families clutching one another, men with hands wrapped in gauze from burns earned during the battle. The air smelled of oil and stale dust, carrying the raw reminder that this fortress had once been only a mine. They entered the memorial bay. Along one wall, slabs of alloy had been carved into panels, names etched deep into their surfaces by cutting torches. The roll was incomplete. Engineers still added fresh lines as casualty lists finalized. Men stood silently before them, hats in hand, faces streaked with tears. Voss approached the panels and set down a single data tag, his brother's last laugh recorded within. He pressed it into a recess beneath the etched names. Now you're not alone, he whispered. Rook stood beside him, shoulders heavy. You think the Empire will let this go? No, Voss admitted, his eyes never leaving the names. But they'll think twice before sending more fleets. Fear buys us time, and time is survival. Cade entered quietly, carrying a slate filled with intercepted chatter from across alien networks. Reports say frontier species are already reconsidering alliances. They're whispering that humans turn silence into death. His voice faltered, caught between pride and grief. Voss faced both men, his tone even, grounded. Then let them whisper, let them fear, let them question their masters. That is how empires fracture, from doubt, not force. For a long while, the three of them stood there, letting the weight of the names wash over them. Later, Voss addressed the surviving crews. Hundreds gathered in the central hangar, faces streaked with grime, uniforms torn, eyes hollow yet burning with something fierce. He climbed onto a loading platform and let his voice carry through the echoing space. You all saw what the Draconians believed, that silence belonged to them. They erased our colonies, our families, without trace, thinking nothing could answer. Tonight, you proved otherwise. You proved silence can be ours, turned into stone, into dust, into weapons they never imagined. You are the men who changed the rules. The hangar was still, every eye locked on him. Some men wept openly, others stood straighter. Voss's voice hardened. Do not think this victory came cheap. Look around you. Every gap where a brother should stand, every name carved into panels, they are the cost. but their cost will not vanish. Their sacrifice will echo across the stars, telling every empire that humanity is no prey. We are the silence they fear. A murmur spread through the hangar, low and rising, not a cheer but something heavier, an acknowledgement, an oath made without words. When the assembly ended, Voss returned once more to the observation slit. The debris of Varuk's fleet still drifted, the shattered bones of an empire's arrogance. He leaned forward, pressing his hands against the cool surface. The recycled air tasted bitter, but the sight before him steadied his breathing. Rook joined him quietly. "What happens now?" "Now," Voss said, his gaze fixed outward. "We teach, we record, we prepare, and we make sure the next time anyone considers erasing us, they remember the night's silence turned against its masters." Cade's voice came from behind, filled with a mixture of exhaustion and conviction. "And if they come again?" Voss finally turned, his eyes sharp, unwavering. "Then we erase them without a sound." The words hung in the air like stone. For the first time in generations, humanity did not speak of survival as hope. They spoke of it as certainty. The battle was finished. The doctrine was written. The galaxy would never see silence the same way again. If this story gave you chills, make sure to smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next HFY showdown. Now we want to hear from you. If you were in Captain Voss's place and had the power to turn silence itself into a weapon, what strategy would you unleash against an empire that thought humanity was finished? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where humanity proves again and again that strategy wins wars before they are ever fought. See you in the next story.